Chief Justice of the United States Warren Burger wrote, quote, "I have also repeatedly given my opinion that there is no effective way to limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention. The convention could make its own rules and set its own agenda. Congress might try to limit the convention to one amendment or to one issue, but there is no way to assure that the convention would obey. After a convention is convened, it will be too late to stop the convention if we don't like its agenda." Ending of quote. Chief Justice Burger has issued a stern warning. Nobody tells a con what to do. Its powers to propose amendments are unlimited. In light of this information, does America, do you really want to risk a convention? As we will explore later, the risk of a convention is far greater than commonly understood. Chief Justice Burger continues saying, quote, "Whatever gain might be hoped for from a new constitutional convention could not be worth the risk involved. A new convention could plunge our nation into constitutional confusion and confrontation at every turn, with no assurance that focus would be on the subject needing attention. I have discouraged the idea of a constitutional convention, and I am glad to see states rescinding their previous resolutions requesting a convention. In these bicentennial years, we should be celebrating its long life, not challenging its very existence." Ending the quote. How great is the risk of a convention, either intended or inadvertent? At one point in time, 32 of the required 34 states had applied to call a convention. They had used the unenforceable requirement that only a balanced budget amendment be addressed. Since then, 3 states have rescinded their applications. Legislators in these rescinding states came to realize that they had applied for a convention only with a vague understanding of the convention process, but with a firm desire to balance the federal budget. They came to realize the dangers inherent in any convention only after the nation's most eminent legal scholars began to reveal the dangers involved. The fact that many state legislatures have included the unenforceable single-issue limitations in their applications shows a pervasive lack of understanding by legislators of their role and powers in seeking an Article 5 convention. So long as any applications remain in effect, there is a danger of either an intended or an inadvertent convention. It is for this reason that Chief Justice Burger was pleased to see states withdrawing their applications. Similar views come from Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Arthur J. Goldberg, who said, quote, "As we look forward to celebrate the bicentennial of the Constitution, a few people have asked, why not another constitutional convention? I would respond by saying that one of the most serious problems Article 5 poses is a runaway convention. There is no enforceable mechanism to prevent a convention from reporting out wholesale changes to our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Moreover, the absence of any mechanism to ensure representative selection of delegates could put a runaway convention in the hands of single-issue groups whose self-interest may be contrary to our national well-being." There ends the quote. Justice Goldberg is not the only eminent legal scholar to be concerned about a runaway convention. Rex E. Lee, former law school professor and later president of Brigham Young University, has written, quote, "In short, if the question is whether a runaway convention is assured, the answer is no. But if the question is whether it is a real and serious possibility, the answer is yes." In our history, we have only one experience with a constitutional convention, and while the end result was good, the convention itself was a definite runaway. Ending the quote. Of the same mind is Charles Allen Wright, professor of law at the University of Texas at Austin. He writes, quote, "I feel quite certain that even opening the door to the possibility of a constitutional convention would be a tragedy for the country." Ending the quote. In addressing the ineffectiveness of any legislature trying to limit a convention to a balanced budget amendment, Christopher Brown, professor of law at the University of Maryland, writes, quote, "In my view, the plurality of amendments opens the door to constitutional change far beyond merely requiring a balanced federal budget." End of quote. The harshest criticism of using the convention method of amendment to require a balanced federal budget comes from Gerald Gunther, professor of law at Stanford University. After reviewing the political intrigue involved in seeking resolutions for such a convention, he writes, quote, "There is no denying the fact. If the present balanced budget convention campaign succeeds in eliciting the necessary applications from 34 state legislatures, the convention call will be triggered by inadequately considered state applications. For the vast preponderance of the legislative applications rest on an entire absence of consideration of the risk of a convention rout. In my view, that constitutes a palpable misuse of the Article 5 convention process. The convention route, as I have said, is legitimate when deliberately and knowingly invoked. The ongoing campaign, by contrast, has produced a situation where inattentive, ignorant, at times cynically manipulated state legislative action threatens to trigger a congressional convention call. I cannot support so irresponsible an invocation of constitutional processes." Ending the quote. Later, Professor Gunther also wrote, quote, "The fear that a constitutional convention could become a runaway convention and propose wholesale changes in our Constitution is by no means unfounded. Rather, this broad view of the authority of a convention reflects the consensus of most constitutional scholars who have commented on the issue." There ends the quote. Bluntly put, Professor Gunther declares that state legislators have applied to Congress for a balanced budget convention without knowing what they are doing, having been misled and manipulated by special interest lobbyists. A small minority of legal scholars believe that a single-issue convention can be called. To support their position, con proponents point to these scholars and ignore the majority view. But the very existence of such a substantial diversity of opinion among these scholars renders the dangers of a convention very real. Con proponents have been unable to mount a successful challenge to the overpowering logic of the majority view that a con cannot be limited to a single issue. Driven by desperation, they have attacked the integrity of these scholars by accusing them of bias. They falsely accuse them of intellectual dishonesty, claiming that the scholars are opposed to a balanced federal budget because they fear losing federal grants to themselves and their universities. The abject silliness of this argument is instantaneously apparent. There are no reports of any scholar or university having lost any of their grants in the process of balancing the budget. Applications for a convention are serious business, only to be used if a legislature believes that the present Constitution is structurally flawed and in need of repair. An unbalanced federal budget is not the result of a constitutional flaw. It is the result of a Congress which refused to obey constitutional restraints upon its spending of federal funds. Also remember, there are no guarantees of what the convention might produce. Applications are not tools of blackmail or power politics to be used to force Congress into doing something. The risks are enormous, and the possible benefits have never been established.